Monday's home games. That is Rick Zamperin from 900 CHML, Steve Milton from the Hamilton Spectator. I'm Scott Radley from the Hamilton Spectator and 900 CHML. You'll notice Bubba O'Neill, he's on the IL today, a little under the weather. He'll be back. Here is the question, guys. We heard this week or last week that Randy Ambrosie and the CFL say they're going to delay the start of the year. Grey Cup is going to be in December now, not November. Shortened season to 14 games starting in August. But Rick, the truth, how many games will the CFL season really have this year?
Well, you know what? I'd love to say 14, but, we've seen the best laid out plans in many other, sports, and they haven't materialized. So, if I were to hazard my best guess, I think, August 5th, I wouldn't necessarily say it's an aggressive target date, as Randy Ambrosie called it, to start the season. I think, they're going to make a decision sometime in mid-June or late June in terms of whether or not they could actually, proceed with that August 5th date, because we know training camp has to start a couple of weeks ahead of time. But my best guess is a couple of games will be canceled, or the season will be postponed a little bit more, because maybe they're not quite sure that they're going to get 25, 30, 50% of fans in each stadium. So I'm going to guess 12 as a nice round number. Maybe they'll start in and around Labor Day, maybe a couple weeks before Labor Day. And that will be, mid to late August, I think is going to be the true start date. So I'll go with 12.
12, yeah. Okay.
That's a number that just jumped out at me. It's a number that we threw around a lot last year when we were looking at the schedule itself. We were looking at, I think we landed that they couldn't do fewer than 8, and I would change that to 9, and that you almost must start by Labor Day. So I think that's part of the built-in cushion of August 5, plus the 3 weeks at the end of the season. You got some room to play there, but you only have so much room. It's not like hockey. You can't go 4 and 5, right? There's a whole different way. There's a whole different training way. All of those kinds of things is built into the CBA. The part even that still stands despite a change in the pandemic has a limited number. I think it's 4 days between games. So there's those kinds of things that you have to work on. Training camp will likely, it'll be 3 weeks because they're building a week of quarantine into that. I thought it'd be shorter, but that seems to be inside the league, the plan at the moment. So I'm going to say 12 as well. It's a good round number. It's a dozen.
Well,
Scott,
it's a dozen, but it's a dozen. Yes, that's true.
Yeah, man, it means nothing, but
what is the line? What is the mantra, the motto almost of the CFL every summer? The season doesn't begin until Labor Day. Mm-hmm. So I'm going with that as the starting point. That I don't think that I think Labor Day is the earliest that you potentially get going this year. And that then means, I don't know whether it's 8 or 9 games based on the schedule they have right now and the move back, but I'll say 8 games, which I think, I agree with Steve. I think that would probably be about the minimum you could have to be credible. Although I'm quite positive that if it came to it, then we're way ahead of ourselves here, but if it really came to it and there was no other option and they could only play 6 games and then have a playoffs and a Grey Cup, I believe the CFL would do that just to be on the field. But for credibility, I'm going with 8 as the number. Now, the question becomes, as a follow-up to that, whether we're right or not, what about players? You've now got not just the crossing the border, the challenges, Rick, but let's say, and I'm not saying I'm right. You guys said 12, I said 8, but let's say it's closer to my number. You now have players, you're going to ask players who don't make a ton of money to take a prorated salary of less than half, minus, they already talked about a 20% deduction for no fans or limited fans.
Right.
How many players are going to say, if it comes right down to it, yeah, I'll come up and beat my body into a pulp for a fraction of my salary? Or how many will say 8 games? Call me next year.
Yeah, there might be some, but I think there's going to be more athletes because they love to play the game. Exactly. That they want to play the game and they want to get back on the field. They've had a year and a little bit now of nothing, working their quote unquote normal jobs, and they want to get back to what they love doing, and that's playing football. And there's a couple of pros to that. Number one, you get a little more game film, especially if you're a newbie to the league. If you're a guy who's kind of hanging on to say, hey, I could still play this game. And even if you're, a seasoned veteran or been in the league just, 2 or 3 years, you want to get back on the field because you're looking for that next contract. You're looking for that big season. You're looking for that big payday come next offseason. So it's important for not only the league to get back on the field, but for these players as well, because they really want to play.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly. Be no shortage of players it by any means. They're already having to turn away players, but because they're going to be certainly the rosters aren't going to be any bigger for training camp than they have been other years, and generally they're around 100 that come. Right, there's I think 80 plus all the exceptions that don't count against the roster, so they can fill those. I think a fair amount. I think that was one of the reasons for setting a target date, by the way. Is so that players could at least say, okay, I can plan around that. They'll subtract 3 weeks and say, that means I'll have to be at the very latest in Hamilton, let's use an example, by July 17th. But it's probably going to be, more of them are going to be up around, I'm hearing the 10th, 12th, 13th at the moment. But everything can change on this. And at least
does the XFL thing help with that? Assuming the XFL, CFL thing is not finalized, whatever it is by then, does the bauble of the XFL maybe being in play for the following year convince some of the American players who otherwise might be doubtful? Does it convince them to come?
It might have something to do with their agents, but they'll be basing that on information that is only speculative because they're still, they're heading for the merger. There's no doubt about that, but we don't know what that looks like. It might just be a marketing merger at the moment. But yes, I think for some people it will. It won't have, I don't think it'll have a negative impact that way. Because the XFL has said out loud, we're not really going ahead with anything else besides this till we get this straightened out. So you're not going to hold back and say, well, I'll play in the XFL rather than the CFL, because it's, at this moment they're linked. So yes, I think, Scott, that's a very good question, and I think it helps.
And I understand the money thing too, but playing also opens up a lot of doors. So if the XFL launches in 2022, that player who's, whether he's an American or Canadian and wants, has aspirations to play in the XFL or maybe even in the NFL, playing and having really recent game film, I think is going to open a few more avenues, a few more doors for that player to latch on with another team.
Agreed. And, something that some people have mentioned, and again, who knows what is going on because it's being kept pretty tight-lipped, but a couple people have mentioned, well, could the money for the XFL, could the money behind that fund the CFL during its dark period this summer if they can't have fans? That, we go back to our first question, how many games can you play? If there's XFL money that can prop up a CFL that can't have fans in the stands yet, that could certainly affect the length of the season too, if you now have some support.
Can I say two things to that? One of which, if that's come up, it's only come up in very, 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 very light fashion at the moment. It could, as you say, Scott, things are changing so quickly. The order in which you discuss certain factors could, if you're the XFL and the CFL, could change. Secondly, I don't think they ever asked the CFL for a loan or the government for a loan this year. There were massive discussions with the government over a number of ways that they could be helped. But I don't think there was ever a formal ask, because I know for sure nobody in the league was ever. It wasn't any part of their even potential income when they looked at it for 2021 and on any of the teams. So there's that. Now that might mean that they maybe thought, well, maybe we could go XFL. I don't think it even means that. This is one of the reasons they were able to do this and why it took so long to come up with an announcement was they had to get commitments. And I would think that it was mostly hinged on the 3 publicly owned teams about investment. If can you do this? That's why they will not do a bubble, because it's only expense.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
At this point, I'm not saying they wouldn't have a bubble like you play 5 live games, and then all of a sudden something happens.
But not an 18-game bubble over a 20-week period.
Yeah.
What do you think? How many games will the CFL really play this year? 14 right now is the target. What do you think? Comment down below. Tell us your prediction. One of the beauties of this is you tell us your prediction. It stays online because stuff never goes away. And then when your number is right down the road, you can come back to our site and say, see, I was the Kreskin who knew exactly what was going on. I know more about football than those 3 idiots on that show. See, you'll have bragging
I
rights.
do that already without predicting, Scott.
I know, but this is your chance to prove your stuff. Let us know. Comment down below. Predict it down below. Subscribe. Hit notifications. We'll talk to you soon.